I recently had the pleasure of interviewing Andrew Scott, CEO of Fifth Season, about their new aeroponic vertical farm in Arizona. The company is currently in the process of scaling up and commercializing its vertical farming operation with the goal of getting fresh greens to market within 24 hours of harvest. It's pretty cool. But while we were talking, I couldn't help but ask Andrew if they might eventually grow something a little weirder, like space food. You see, I'm pretty sure the first food ever grown in space wasn't fruit or leafy greens. It was potatoes. Back in 1995, NASA and the University of Wisconsin teamed up on the Space Shuttle Columbia to grow special super potatoes that could feed astronauts on long missions. And when the mission returned to Earth, those spuds became the first food grown in space to make it back alive. Now, before I get to what kinds of foods are being grown in space today, let me just say this. While potatoes are certainly an important part of many people's diets, especially in places like Idaho where my mom grew up, it's hard to argue that leafy greens like lettuce are more delicious, more nutritious, and just overall a better pick for most people. That's why we started growing salad greens in our aquaponic system last year. And one of the best things about living in a modern age is that we can buy super healthy microgreens from our local supermarket all year round. They're packed with nutrients and flavor. But how did we get here? Well, let's start at the beginning with the first experiment in space agriculture. In 1982, the first Russian space station called Salyut 7 went into orbit, and with it went some volunteer wheat seeds. That was a pretty haphazard approach. A bunch of seeds floated around a space station for a few months and then came home. Today, we know that some of them germinated, but not much else because the researchers weren't prepared for the results. It just sort of happened. And so it wasn't until almost 2 decades later that the Russians tried again, sending 48 packets of dry seeds into space aboard the Mir space station. They wanted to test different temperatures, light levels, and durations of the experiment. After 3 days in space, the seeds returned to Earth and were planted in pots of soil. 16 days later, 4 of the pea shoots had sprouted. It was a huge success and proved that it was possible to grow plants in space. The U.S. hadn't been idle during this time, though, since the Apollo program ended in 1972. NASA had turned its focus to building the Skylab space station out of the hollowed-out third stage of a Saturn V moon rocket. By 1973, it was occupied by 3 astronauts who stayed aloft for 84 days, conducting experiments in plant growth. Over several space station missions, NASA would grow lots of different plants in microgravity, including tomatoes, onions, carrots, radishes, and dozens of others. But it was also clear that plants need more than just water and light. Skylab's crew reported that their plants often suffered from a lack of oxygen, making them difficult to grow and forcing them to use up precious water faster than expected. These experiments gave us an important lesson about the challenges of growing plants in space. In 1991, NASA put out a request for proposals to study how to build a closed ecological system that could sustain human life. This led to the design of the Biosphere 2, an ambitious project built in the Arizona desert that attempted to replicate Earth's ecosystems inside a giant glass jar. For 2 years, 8 people lived entirely off the land inside Biosphere 2, eating mostly vegetables, fruits, grains, and beef raised on site. The experiment was generally a failure, not because nothing grew, but because it was too complicated to maintain over the long term. In fact, it turns out that beef doesn't really do well in desert environments. Just ask anyone from Texas. However, the Biosphere 2 project did result in some useful side effects. For example, it spurred the development of advanced greenhouses, improved our understanding of closed-loop life support systems, and inspired the creation of the National Center for Advanced Materials, a nonprofit research center that studies how plants grow in space. Meanwhile, the Russians had developed their own space gardening program. Starting in the late 1980s, they sent several space shuttle missions to study plant growth in detail. One such mission sent cosmonauts into space for 4 months to observe how their bodies changed when they ate only space-grown vegetables. Because this was the 90s, though communication between the US and Russia wasn't exactly easy. So these programs didn't always share their results. Nevertheless, the space race continued. In 1993, Japan sent a tiny seedling of a tomato into space aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour. The plan was to study how growing conditions affected the plant's development. And in 1995, a Japanese billionaire named Takaaki Furukawa funded a private experiment to grow potatoes on the Russian space station Mir. He'd gotten interested in space gardening after reading an article about the Biosphere Project, and thought it would be fun to see if he could grow food for his friends back home. The experiment took a lot longer than expected, and not just because it involved waiting for the potatoes to sprout. Turns out, customs officials got nervous about importing mysterious packages from outer space. But in the end, they approved the shipment, and Mr. Furukawa's friends enjoyed some truly unique spuds. These early experiments showed that it was possible to grow food in space, but they also revealed just how complicated it is. Take those potatoes, for example. They had to be specially selected for their ability to resist diseases and pests. Then they needed to be planted in a mix of vermiculite and peat, watered with nutrient-rich solutions and exposed to precisely controlled lighting. It's not enough to just chuck some dirt into a pot and hope for the best. Today, scientists have gotten a lot better at growing plants in space, but it's still tricky business. Most of the food eaten by astronauts is still shipped from Earth, but sometimes fresh veggies are nice. So on the International Space Station, astronauts can supplement their meals with leafy greens grown aboard the orbiting lab. The current crop is red Russian kale, which was sent to the ISS in December 2021. Its small size and slow growth rate make it ideal for space travel. Plus, it's packed with vitamins and minerals that astronauts need to stay healthy. Each leaf has about 5 times more vitamin C than oranges and twice the potassium found in bananas. To make sure the kale stays fresh, NASA instructs astronauts to eat it within 2 weeks of harvest. On Earth, this kind of kale might be used in salads or smoothies, but in zero gravity, the possibilities are a little different. Astronauts have reported that the taste of space-grown produce is often different from what you'd find on Earth, so the ISS crew has gotten creative with their menus, tossing the leaves into pasta sauces, stews, and soups. I imagine it must be pretty fun for them to enjoy a fresh bowl of gumbo without having to worry about scrubbing the pot afterwards. While it's satisfying to imagine astronauts plucking fresh food from their space garden, the reality is a little different. Growing plants in space isn't just about providing astronauts with tasty snacks. It's also an important part of research into the future of space travel. If humans are going to live and work on other planets, we'll need to figure out how to grow food in completely alien environments. Even on Earth, there are benefits to growing food in space. Plants grown in microgravity tend to have shorter stems and thicker cell walls, which makes them tougher and more resistant to pests. There's also something kind of fun about watching plants grow in zero gravity. Maybe it's the novelty of seeing something familiar behave in a completely new way. Or maybe it's just the reminder that even in the most challenging environments, life finds a way to thrive. So the next time you sit down to dinner, take a moment to appreciate the humble potato. Not only is it a delicious and nutritious food, but it's also helped push the boundaries of human exploration. Who knows what other wonders it might have in store for us in the future? We may never know what the first food grown in space actually was, but it's safe to say that it wouldn't have been possible without the humble potato. And who knows what other wonders it might have in store for us in the future. Maybe one day soon we'll all be enjoying fresh space-grown spuds on our dinner table. Until then, though, we can settle for the next best thing, the crispy, delicious goodness of a bag of microwave fries.